Right. Last week, James talked about the history of Israel, the nation from the Bible, the nation that it is today, slightly different things, and of course the land that the nation of Israel in the Bible, and of course the nation of Israel today, as well as the Palestinians inhabit. So we had a okay. So yeah, we had a 4,000-year rundown of what's transpired during that time. Today what we'd like to do is we'd like to zero in on a couple of things in the Bible that point to why things are the way they are today. I can see everyone looking up there, so I'm just going to wait until until we're sorted. Want me to try sharing it again?
Yeah, maybe try it.
Don't need to see me up there anyway. All right. Yes. It's a pretty cool picture. That's Israel's Iron Dome in action. If you don't know what that is, Google it later. That's how they keep their country safe from attacks by rocket and missile from surrounding actors that would like to rain down harm on the people of Israel. And no doubt they're capable of sending their own rockets and missiles back as well to rain down harm on the people that they don't like. So really the picture just sort of shows in a snapshot the constant enmity. There's two sides and they're very, very firmly entrenched in Israel itself. As far as the broader world goes, there's two sides as well, and they're quite firmly entrenched, although it's not always obvious. The current troubles that are happening in Israel with regards to Hamas's incursion into Israel, and then of course the Israelis' reaction to that, has brought into very, very sharp focus the two sides. What I'd like to look at today is why those alignments are there, how they come to be that way. Before we get into it though, none of what we say is in support of one side or the other. We don't take sides, we're not political, so don't misconstrue anything that we say today as being support for one side or the other. Also, none of what we go through tonight is about racial superiority. God's not interested in racial superiority. We're not interested in racial superiority or inferiority. No one is above or below another. In God's eyes, everybody needs salvation. So don't misconstrue anything we go through today as being any form of putting any particular peoples or nation or race up on a pedestal or underneath the pedestal. There we go. So when it comes to Israel, and this isn't the first time this has happened, but again it's the most recent times coming to very sharp focus at the moment, there's very clear alignments of nations. If you've had any look at the news articles in the last little while, you read that Israel and Hamas, which is not necessarily representative of the Palestinian people, but unfortunately for many of them in Gaza, it's part of their local government there. You read about those two sides. You also read about Hezbollah and Lebanon and Syria and Egypt and Jordan, and the Saudis have an opinion, and the Turks have an opinion, and Iran certainly has a very strong opinion, and European nations wade into it. They come into it. Great Britain comes into it. The USA is a very strong support for Israel. You don't have to read too far to find that. Russia likes to position itself in the mix somewhere in there. Australia, New Zealand, Canada, all these places all find the need to find a position in this alignment. Everyone is being quite careful to say, to recognise the plight of the poor Palestinian people themselves, who everything is sort of going on above their heads quite literally, and sometimes at their feet as well, unfortunately. But in terms of the cause of Israel and the cause of those that oppose Israel, there's very clear alignments amongst the nations. In the blue corner, you'll find Israel, of course. You'll find the United States of America. You'll find Great Britain. You'll find parts of northwestern Europe, such as France, Germany, the Netherlands, often Scandinavia. You'll find Australia in there as well. You'll find Canada. These nations, and many others, commonly referred to as the West. Other nations that may include Italy, other European nations such as Greece, the North Atlantic Treaty Organisation. That's not a nation, but it's an alliance of much of Europe, plus North America, being Canada and the USA. You'll find New Zealand in there. India often aligns with the West, although sometimes it depends what the cause is. Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, all side with the West usually on these sorts of things. Papua New Guinea is on the West side, it's on Israel's side. In fact, they sent quite a high-level delegation to Israel only some weeks ago, or maybe a few months ago, and they're one of a small number of nations that have moved their embassy to Jerusalem. So there you go, for what it's worth. Maybe they can send their one little battleship when the time comes. I don't know if it'll make it. All right, in the red corner, the Arab nations. These are nations like Saudi Arabia, Lebanon, Syria, Egypt, Iraq, Jordan, Qatar. There's about 22 nations that identify as being Arab or Arab heritage. There's probably roughly about 12 that are really thoroughly Arab nations. Iran, the broader Islamic world, from Morocco in northwestern Africa right through to Indonesia. There's a lot of nations that are predominantly Muslim, and Russia. These are the alignments that we see happening now. They're really sharp focus over this current issue. The question we're asking today, we'll call these nations not the West for now. The question we're asking today is why? Why does this happen? Almost every single time there's some sort of flare-up in Israel and Gaza and the West Bank and so on. This is where everybody falls. Each and every time. Each and every time. This is how it falls. Why? People try to make sense of it all. We're going to look in the Bible to see if the Bible has clues as to why these nations line up the way they do. So we'll go through some of the key players and have a look at them. First one being Israel. Modern-day Israel is a Jewish nation. That's not the same as Israel in the Bible. The Jews come from, or originally come from, the tribe of Judah. You can hear it in the name, can't you? The tribe of Judah also incorporated Benjamin and parts of the tribe of Levi. So the Jews, as you start to read about them in the later historic books in the Bible, such as Esther, such as Nehemiah and Ezra, and then of course into the New Testament books, they're people who come from those couple of tribes, predominantly the tribe of Judah. Along the way, many other nations, particularly of Edom, but also other nations came into the mix, took on Jewish beliefs, subscribed to Judaism, and throughout all of the last 2,000 and a bit years, the Jewish nation has incorporated lots of people from lots of different ethnicities as well. And so modern-day Israel is actually a real hodgepodge of people from all over the place with lots of different ancestries. In there, still today, are some with a lineage back to the tribe of Judah, Benjamin, and Levi, who made up the original kingdom of Judah that you read about in the Bible. Of course, Judah was a child of Jacob. Jacob was a child of Isaac, and Isaac was a child of Abraham. So there's still a portion in modern-day Israel today who are from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, whose name was changed to Israel. So even though there's lots of others there, there's still those there as well. Let's go to Genesis 17. James also covered off on these scriptures last week, but these are pretty key when we're looking at why these struggles happen today. Genesis 17, we'll read verse 8. This is something that the Lord promised to Abraham. And I will give unto thee and to thy seed after thee the land wherein thou art a stranger, all the land of Canaan, for an everlasting possession, and I will be their God. Okay, there's a promise. There's a promise. It's from God to Abraham. And when we go through all of this, we find that, if nothing else, God keeps his promises. And that's really one of the main points that we'd like to draw out of this today. God keeps his promises. He's promised the land of Canaan, which roughly equates to modern-day Israel today, the geographic territory. Some people call it Palestine, some people call it Israel, whatever you call it, that little bit there between the Jordan and the Mediterranean, which goes roughly from Sinai, thanks mate, up to Lebanon there. That bit of land, the land of Canaan, God said, I will give it to you, Abraham, and to your seed after you, to your descendants. All right, flip over to verse 19. You have to bear with me, obviously, have a bit of a cough. And God said, verse 19, yes, and God said, Sarah thy wife shall bear thee a son indeed, and thou shalt call his name Isaac. And I will establish my covenant with him for an everlasting covenant, and with his seed after him. Still talking to Abraham there, but now we see that God is identifying Isaac as the son that these promises would go down through. God's covenant would go down through Isaac. Okay, let's go over to Genesis 35. And verse 12. God's now speaking to Jacob, who was one of Isaac's two sons. Verse 12, and the land which I gave Abraham and Isaac, to thee I will give it, and to thy seed after thee will I give the land. Okay, so we've got a clear descent of this promise, don't we? It was to Abraham. Abraham, going to give you the land of Canaan and to your seed after you. Abraham had lots of children, two we read about, Ishmael and Isaac, mostly anyway. Isaac was the one identified as the one that this promise would go down through. And then to Jacob, who is one of Isaac's sons, it said again, the promise is going through you. To your seed I will give this land. Jacob's name was changed to Israel. So God promised Canaan to Abraham and Isaac and Jacob as an everlasting possession. That's what we've just read there. The fact that there is a small portion of the children of Israel in modern-day Israel today, amongst that Jewish nation, which is more of a hodgepodge of different ancestries and so on, is a modern-day fulfillment of God's promise to Abraham. And of course, we know that for many years, it's hay fever season. We know that we've known that for many years there were people there who are not descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But when the British took control of Palestine once again in 1917, and then the Jews, with that small incorporation of children of Israel descendants, tribe of Judah, Benjamin and Levi, moved into Palestine, we have the fulfillment of these promises in our times. Now, whether or not you believe that is up to you really, but it's there in the Bible, and it's there on your TV screen, okay? And it's there on the internet. You can read all about it. So put the dots together, and what does that mean to the people of Israel? It means a lot to them. Jerusalem in particular, you read all about it through the Bible. It was the capital city of the nation of Israel in biblical times. When it broke into two kingdoms, it was the capital of the kingdom of Judah, from which came the Jews. It's the city of David, one of the great ancestors of the Jewish people. It was the site of the temple. It's where Solomon built the temple. It's where Herod built a second temple. It's where Jesus did a lot of amazing things, and not that the Jews particularly want to hear too much about that, but so much happened throughout their history there in Jerusalem. So Jerusalem and the land around it, Palestine, Israel, is holy and special to them. And that's why they're so firmly entrenched on their side, in their corner. I hope that we can see how far back that goes and why they hold it so dear. Okay, that's Israel. Great Britain, USA, and others. I mentioned some of them, Australia, Canada, New Zealand, and so on. Great Britain and its resulting countries. So it colonised the USA, it colonised Australia, it colonised Canada, New Zealand, in some parts South Africa. Lots of other countries come in under the Commonwealth, but those ones are the main ones. Great Britain and the resulting countries are the reformation of biblical Israel. That sounds like a ridiculous statement, doesn't it? Sounds like, how on earth could that possibly be the case? And as I get into this, I will say that we're not necessarily super dogmatic about this stuff, but you've got to ask yourself the question, if these nations aren't the modern day fulfillment of biblical Israel, because remember, there was more than just the tribe of Judah, there's more than just the Jews. If these nations aren't the modern day fulfillment of where Israel is today and the promises that God made to Israel, then where is it? Great Britain, and from it, the countries that stemmed from it, is far and away the best that we've got, the best fit for the promises that are made to Israel from Genesis through into the prophets as well. It's, in my view, unnecessarily controversial, but it is controversial because people bring with it racial overtones and start to say, oh, well, that means Great Britain is better. That means the USA is better. It means they're superior. It means God favours them more and all of that sort of stuff. As I said at the start, not about that at all. In fact, if anything, it's shame because they've known God for a long time. They've had God with them and God's promises and the scriptures for a long time. And you look at Great Britain and America and Australia today, it's full of injustice, it's full of anger, it's full of hatred, it's full of confusion, it's full of immorality, it's full of all the sorts of things that God said not to do. So, you know, if these people are biblical Israel, then the greater shame on them for not knowing how they ought to behave. Nevertheless, there's scriptural, archaeological, historic evidence to support that claim. And as I said, if it's not these nations, then where is Israel today? That's what we'd have to ask. And so we broadly believe in the Revival Fellowship that Great Britain and those resulting countries are the reformation of biblical Israel. There's some scriptures. You can take a picture or ask me for the presentation later, or we can talk about them later on if you have any questions about that at all. As I said, we're not dogmatic about that. We're not going to die on that particular hill, that's for sure. There's much more important things such as salvation. How did it happen? That's a good question. The migration of the tribes of Israel is something that it's happened a long time ago. As I said, there is archaeological and historical evidence, and there's some very diligent people out there who've sort of tried to piece it all together and so on. Like anything in antiquity, it's very hard to prove 100%, but it's hard to prove through archaeological evidence that Jesus Christ rose again but we know that because he's filled us with the Holy Spirit. There are some things that are, very difficult to prove. Did Julius Caesar do and say all the things he did? Did Alexander the Great do and say all the things he did? Did Plato and Socrates and all these people roughly around that same time? We place a lot of store in that. Well, there's similar amounts of evidence for this particular story. When the tribes of Israel were taken captive by Assyria, they ended up beyond Euphrates, and you can read about that in the Bible. They ended up over in the lands roughly equating to Iran today. From there, over thousands of years, they migrated westward, up through the Caucasus, through Europe, often fulfilling certain little bits of Bible prophecy along the way. The Gothic people, for example, most likely a descendant from Israel, and sacked Rome to help fulfill some of the stuff that's there in Revelation. They're used by God as a battle axe to fulfill his plan. They ended up right over in the far corner of Europe there, primarily in Great Britain, probably other bits of those northwestern European countries as well. I think it's amazing. It's an amazing thing. You think about it for a minute. Millions of people over thousands of kilometres, over thousands of years, from one nation, eventually primarily settling all together once again in another place. Only God would do that. Only God could orchestrate that. We can talk about that later if you've got questions. As I said, it doesn't make any of these nations superior, it simply affirms God's faithfulness to his word. Great Britain's royal family continues the line of David, the royal house of Judah. The royal family can trace their lineage back to the tribe of Judah. Once again, in my view, unnecessarily controversial. It's not a statement of superiority at all, but as I say, we're not dogmatic on all of that sort of thing. How does that happen? There's some scriptures to support it. The line of Judah carried on in Ireland via two different lines of migration, then up to Scotland, then into England as Great Britain came together. Great Britain reflects Ephraim, the promises made to Ephraim, who was a son of Joseph, who was a son of Jacob, Israel. The promises made to him with that he would be a great nation and a company of nations. That's reflected by Britain and its Commonwealth today. And to Manasseh, who was Ephraim's older brother, Manasseh would be a great nation. It's probably reasonably well reflected by the United States. Are we saying that every single person in Great Britain and Australia and the United States and all these other places is a descendant of Israel then? Well, no, obviously not, especially as these places get more multicultural. But generally speaking, there's cultural, there's heraldry, there's symbols, there's flags, there's customs, there's also prophecy that all comes together into the mix to help us identify what we're saying today. Once again, if you've got any questions about that, more than happy to talk about it afterwards. Some of the other nations in northwestern Europe also reflect parts of biblical Israel. As I said, the dates of the fulfillment of prophecy, for example, is 2,520 years from the time that Manasseh was taken captive to the time that America was declared independent. 2,520 years is a significant amount of time in Bible prophecy. It's 7 times punishment. I don't have time to go through all of that, but if you'd like to, again, talk about all of that, we can do. It's 2,520 years from the time that Ephraim was taken captive by Assyria through to the formation of Great Britain, the coming together of those nations that make Great Britain today. It was 2,520 years from the time that King Nebuchadnezzar first incurred upon Jerusalem, taking away captives, to the time that Jerusalem was given back to who? Not the Jews at that time, Britain. Britain fell back into Israel of the Bible hands. 2,520 years, another fulfillment of the 7 times punishment. So there's dates of fulfillment of prophecy that support this. There's heraldry, the lion and the unicorn, they're mentioned in conjunction with Israel in quite a significant passage of blessing of Israel by Balaam in Numbers, the book of Numbers, that is. The great seal of the United States of America is full of 13s. Manasseh was the 13th tribe. There's all of the Commonwealth flags, well, not all of them, but quite a few of them. You can see they all bear that flag of Great Britain, which is called the what? Do you kids know what the flag's called? What's it called? The Union Jack. Jack is short for Jacob. The Union of Jacob. That's what their flag is called. It's right there. You know, some of the customs to do with the coronations and so on really closely reflect some of the aspects that we read about coronations of the kings of Israel and of Judah. For example, they all yell, "God save the king," or "God save the queen." In that throne there is a stone, which is another story in and of itself. Maybe you can look that one up for yourself. Charles there, King Charles rather, is holding the scepter. There's a scripture that talks about the scepter, not necessarily that particular scepter, but it's emblematic of what it means. The scepter shall not depart from the house of Judah until Shiloh come, which is a reference to Christ's coming. So there's a lot in there that pretty clearly, to my mind anyway, identifies Great Britain, America, and from it, you know, Australia, Canada, and so on, with biblical Israel. Now, why do we go through all that? Because we're trying to see why the nations align the way they do. And to me, this is further proof of the things that I've just mentioned. Why do America and Great Britain, without fail, every single time, back Israel to the hilt? Why do the other Western nations come in and back Israel to the hilt? Why? Why is it like that? It's like that every single time. It's because they're brothers. It's because they share common ancestry. Is it any coincidence? You can make up your own mind. As we're saying today, this is, to my mind anyway, the likely reason why we see the alignment that we do in the West. Other nations, Taiwan, Japan, South Korea and so on, I suppose they make their decisions based on which side they'd like to fall on. But these are the primary ones that always line up together. Okay, over to the red corner, the Arab nations. The primary ancestor of many of the prominent northern Arabic tribes is Ishmael. They recognise that themselves. It's not something that we sort of have made up or guessing at or anything like that. Let's go to Genesis 16. Genesis 16. Verse 11. This is the Lord speaking to Hagar, who is Ishmael's mother. Hagar was Sarah's handmaid. Sarah was married to Abraham. Verse 11. And the angel of the Lord said unto her, Behold, thou art with child, and shalt bear a son. By Abraham, by the way, they did things differently back then. And shalt call his name Ishmael, because the Lord hath heard thy affliction. And he will be a wild man. His hand will be against every man, and every man's hand against him, and he shall dwell in the presence of all his brethren. So we're reading there about the Lord talking to Hagar and saying, you're going to have a son, you're going to call his name Ishmael, and there's some attributes there of Ishmael and how he would be and his descendants would follow, and so on. If we go over to chapter 17, verse 15, God said unto Abraham, As for Sarai, thy wife, thou shalt not call her name Sarai, but Sarah shall her name be, and I will bless her and give thee a son also of her. So Hagar's had a son, Ishmael, but now Sarah's going to have a son. Yea, I will bless her, and she shall be a mother of nations. Kings of people shall be of her. Then Abraham fell upon his face. People do that a lot in the Bible. It sounds like it really hurts, but maybe we can try it a bit. Next time you're surprised by something, just sort of go down on your face, see how it goes for you. Then Abraham fell upon his face and laughed, and said in his heart, Shall a child be born unto him that is 100 years old? And shall Sarah that is 90 years old bear? And Abraham said unto God, Oh, that Ishmael might live before thee. And God said, Sarah thy wife shall bear thee a son indeed, and thou shalt call his name Isaac, and I will establish my covenant with him for an everlasting covenant, and with his seed after him. And as for Ishmael, I have heard thee. Behold, I have blessed him, and will make him fruitful, and will multiply him exceedingly. 12 princes shall he beget, and I will make him a great nation. But my covenant will I establish with Isaac, which Sarah shall bear unto thee at this set time in the next year. So that's where the trouble starts, is that Ishmael was not the son of promise, although Abraham preferred it to be for a time. Instead, Isaac was the son of promise. So we've got these two stepbrothers there. In fact, before I move forward, I might just go over to 21, chapter 21 as well. Let's go over to chapter 21, verse 9. Actually, verse 8. And the child grew, talking about Isaac, and was weaned, and Abraham made a great feast the same day that Isaac was weaned. And Sarah saw the son of Hagar, the Egyptian, so this is Ishmael, which she had borne unto Abraham, mocking. Wherefore she said unto Abraham, Cast out this bondwoman and her son, for the son of this bondwoman shall not be heir with my son, even with Isaac. And the thing was very grievous in Abraham's sight because of his son. So the trouble started back then between these two stepbrothers and the parents of them. The people of Ishmael today, many of the Arab nations, they primarily subscribe to Sunni Islam, which came to be in the early 600s AD, although if you ask them, they'll say that even Abraham was a Muslim because Islam means submission to God, and Abraham submitted to God, therefore he was one of the first Muslims. That's their take on things. It's Sunni, not Sunni, although... Yes, anyway, we'll just keep moving. They believe the promises either go through Ishmael, I should have written there, either go through Ishmael rather than Isaac. That's some strand of belief within Sunni Islam. Or that although the promises went through Isaac, later on because of Israel, the nation of Israel, that's Banu Israel, right? Because of their disobedience much later on to God, he removed those promises from them, and they forfeited it, along with the rights to the land. So depending on who you ask, who you consult, and so on, it's one or the other. They believe that Ishmael was the son almost sacrificed by Abraham and not Isaac. So you can sort of see how the thinking is different from what we read in the scriptures. They believe Muhammad was a descendant of Ishmael, Muhammad being the main prophet of Islam. And when it comes to Jerusalem, around 621 AD, Muhammad allegedly journeyed from Mecca to Jerusalem in a single night on the back of a winged horse-like animal, where he led prophets, including Abraham, Moses and Jesus, in prayer before ascending to heaven to individually greet the prophets and negotiate with God to reduce the required daily prayers from 50 down to 5. One presumes he also came back down to earth again. And the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem, that quite lovely looking building with the gold dome, is actually built on the site where that allegedly happened, where he supposedly ascended into heaven and helped everybody by knocking down the number of daily prayers from 50 to 5. That's in Islamic belief. I haven't just made that up. That goes some way to telling us why Jerusalem is considered such a holy place and the surrounding land such a special place as well by Islam. Some sayings, just a bit more on Jerusalem, it was the first Qibla before Mecca. That's the place that they face when they pray. So everybody knows now. In fact, you see them by the roadside sometimes at certain times of the day. Pull the truck or the car over and get the prayer mat out, make sure we face Mecca, and down they get for one of their 5 prayers. If they had to do 50 still, they'd never make it to Melbourne, I suppose. They'd just always be pulling over. But that's, they used to face Jerusalem. It got changed to Mecca. Some of the sayings of Muhammad indicate that the whole land of Palestine should be under Muslim rule at the end of days. So there's a real end times kind of message entwined in there with Jerusalem and with Palestine as well. Hence, when you take all of that into account, it's quite a holy and special place for them. Jerusalem, once again. The Arab nations generally are against Israel, have been for a long time, and often against the rest of the West too, and the other way also. That goes back to the sibling rivalry between Ishmael and Isaac. It's right there in the book of Genesis, in the book of beginnings, which is what Genesis means. Hamas is a very, very extreme form of all of that, by the way. I'm not saying all of the Arab nations are quite as extreme as Hamas. For example, this is from Hamas's charter. Palestine is an Islamic waqf, I'm not sure how you say that, which means an endowment. land that is consecrated, set aside for Muslim generations until Judgment Day. They believe, as many other Muslims do, although perhaps not quite with the same preparedness to back it up with extreme violence, they believe that once a place has been conquered by Islam, as Palestine was, as a lot of North Africa was, as Spain was, it is theirs forever. Regardless of who's there, it is now theirs, it's an endowment to them, and that's how it should at least be. And that's why those like Hamas, who are inclined to really back it up so fervently and religiously with some pretty extreme actions and words. A lot of Hamas's charter and Hamas itself is almost entirely concerned with winning back Palestine and Jerusalem from the Jews. That's almost their entire existence for being. The Arab nations strongly back the Palestinian people. There's just one news article. Bahrain, Egypt, Jordan, Kuwait, Morocco, Oman, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates there condemn violations of international law by Israel. Most have not condoned the actions of Hamas, by the way, in their incursions because they know they can leave that to Iran. The descent of Iran is unclear. Elam comes from Shem, that's up there in the Iranian area. Madai and some of the other northern tribes that possibly became the Persians and the modern day Iranians today come from Japheth. It's not clear, it's likely a mix. It's a place that has had a lot of people on its soil over the thousands of years. However, in Iran they subscribe to Islam, a slightly different strain to Sunni Islam. It's Shia Islam. The main difference, as I understand it, is that it all depends on who they believe Muhammad sort of passed the mantle on to, whether it was a relative of his or whether it was a trusted lieutenant of his. Sunni comes from one, Shia comes from the other, and no doubt there's lots of little nuances between them all. Nevertheless, they regard destruction of Israel as a primary goal. The special forces of Iran's Revolutionary Guard is called the Quds Force. Translated, that is the Jerusalem. That's what Quds means in their language, the Jerusalem Force. So even though this group of really special commandos, they're sort of like the CIA's Special Operations Group, right? So they do all the really cool, crazy things. Even though they're way over there in Iran, they've named that particular force, the real tip of the spear, the Jerusalem Force. And that tells us, a lot about how they feel about it, doesn't it? The head of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, which is like the really well-trained, highly skilled, highly resourced part of the Iranian Defense Forces, was headed by this guy, Soleimani. He was actually assassinated by the Americans very deliberately a few years ago. Again, we're not supporting either side here, just showing the enmity that's there. This is what Iran had to say about Hamas's attack on Israel. It was a proud operation. Until they expressed support for attacks until the liberation of Palestine and Jerusalem. Iran has a lot of support to give to Hamas, has done for a long time. It also has built a number of proxies. These are groups, sometimes whole governments, sometimes just militias that act in Iran's interests all around the Middle East. If you can't really follow that, that's okay. It's just sort of saying there that there's quite a few places through those peoples through those nations that Iran uses to further its own ends. Hezbollah is probably the most well-known one on Israel's border, currently engaged in some tit-for-tat rocket and arms exchanges with Israel, possibly going to open up a second front in this war as it develops. And as you can see, they were pretty happy with Hamas's heroic operation as well. It's very important to them all that Palestine and Jerusalem is won back from Israel for Islam. Iran has a number of proxies in Bahrain, Iraq, Lebanon, the Palestinian territories, Syria and Yemen. The primary link here is not necessarily one of lineage, but rather one of culture and ideology and religion. And that goes back to the father of the Arabic people. Ishmael, through him a descendant, Muhammad, through him Islam, and the nations such as Iran that are very, very fervent about Islam today. That's why we get that alignment. Iran's actually also mentioned in Ezekiel 38 as being part of a coalition that would come against Israel in end times. And we're seeing a lot of those nations lining up now. Other Islamic nations, although not ethnically Arab or Iranian, almost a quarter of the current world is Muslim. Almost a quarter, 25%. 1 in every 4 people of the whole world is Muslim of varying intensity, but mostly Sunni. The entire swathe of northern Africa and parts of western Africa, of course, as well. Morocco, Algeria, Libya, Egypt, Sudan, Somalia, large parts of other African countries such as Nigeria, through to Central Asia, all the stands, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Pakistan, Afghanistan, much of Southeast Asia, including Indonesia, which I believe is possibly the largest Muslim country in the world, parts of the Philippines, Malaysia. And you can see there's other countries that have a large population of Muslims as well. These nations tend to take primarily the Muslim view of Israel and Jerusalem, as you would expect. Similar to Iran, really, believe the same things. And that's why you get things like this. That's in Egypt, in Cairo, that's in Istanbul, Turkey, that's in Tunisia, in northern Africa, that's in Jakarta, in Indonesia, that's in Afghanistan, burning the Israel flag there. You get the idea. They care about this. They really do, with a real fervour. Often those nations are against Israel. They're often against the rest of the West as well, particularly America, death to America, all that sort of thing, primarily through that link to Islam and therefore culturally to Ishmael and the rivalry with Isaac Ishmael. Russia. This is the last nation that we'll look at. We will spend just a bit of time on this one, but we don't have too much longer to go. Let's read Genesis 25. Verse 21. And Isaac entreated the Lord for his wife because she was barren, and the Lord was entreated of him, and Rebekah his wife conceived, and the children struggled together within her. Just think about that for a minute. I don't know if any of the ladies here have had twins. One seems like enough of a struggle. Imagine having 2 and they're constantly boxing on, as boys do sometimes. Usually it's when they get a bit older. These ones were struggling together even in the womb. And the children struggled together within her, and she said, If it be so, why am I thus? And she went to inquire of the Lord. And the Lord said unto her, 2 nations are in thy womb, and 2 manner of people shall be separated from thy bowels. And the one people shall be stronger than the other people, and the elder shall serve the younger. With each of these scriptures, we're starting to build a little bit of a picture here. And when her days to be delivered were fulfilled, behold, there were twins in her womb. And the first came out red all over like a hairy garment, and they called his name Esau. And after that came his brother out, and his hand took hold on Esau's heel, and his name was called Jacob. And Isaac was 80 years old when she bare them. And the boys grew, and Esau was a cunning hunter, a man of the field, and Jacob was a plain man, dwelling in tents, sitting on the couch watching TV. And Isaac loved Esau because he did eat of his venison, but Rebekah loved Jacob. And Jacob sod pottage, and Esau came from the field, and he was faint. And Esau said to Jacob, Feed me, I pray thee, with that same red pottage, for I am faint. Therefore was his name called Edom, which means red. And Jacob said, Sell me this day thy birthright. And Esau said, Behold, I am at the point to die, and what profit shall this birthright do to me? A real focus on the here and now, the natural over the spiritual. Verse 33, And Jacob said, Swear to me this day. And he sware unto him, and he sold his birthright unto Jacob. Then Jacob gave Esau bread and pottage of lentils, and he did eat and drink, and rose up and went his way. Thus Esau despised his birthright. So a bit of a longer passage there. From it we get the fact that Esau and Jacob would struggle. They would struggle together. We've already had a look at the Jacob side as it plays out today. Now we're trying to see who Esau might be. I might get back to that one in a minute. They would struggle and would continue to, with the younger to gain the upper hand. So we've traced Jacob through to the global west. If this is still the case, we should find Esau in opposition to Jacob, even today. Let's read Genesis 27, verse 38. So not only has Jacob got the birthright, he's also managed to steal the blessing earlier in this chapter. And Esau comes along, and he's quite upset about it. And Esau said unto his father, Hast thou but one blessing, my father? Bless me, even me also, O my father. And Esau lifted up his voice and wept. And Isaac his father answered and said unto him, Behold, thy dwelling shall be the fatness of the earth, and of the dew of heavens from above. And by thy sword shalt thou live, and shalt serve thy brother. And it shall come to pass, when thou shalt have the dominion, that thou shalt break his yoke from off thy neck. And Esau hated Jacob because of the blessing wherewith his father blessed him. And he decided he'd try to kill him. So Esau, in this particular blessing, has been told that you'll be bountiful. Your descendants will be bountiful. You'll get a lot of good stuff. But you'll be subject to Jacob. There would come a time where eventually Esau would break the yoke of Jacob as well. Now, you can argue that this happened in part when Jerusalem was overrun by Babylon, and Edom, who were the descendants of Esau, no longer had to be subservient to Judah. In fact, that bit had happened quite a long time before, but they really rejoiced in that day, as the Bible says. You can read about it in Obadiah, in Psalm 137, because no longer was Judah there. Finally got the upper hand. The yoke has been broken. That hatred towards Jacob, you can read about it in lots of places right throughout the Bible. It starts there in Genesis 27. You can read about it in Numbers, I think it is. You can read about it in the book of Judges. You can read about it when King David and King Saul were around, and various other kings after that. Constant battles. There are some really key enemies that popped up through that time who were from Edom. Herod himself, who had all of the children under 2 in the Bethlehem area killed to try and eliminate Jesus, was from Edomite descent. So that hatred has continued to be there. So if we come back to that time when Jerusalem was overrun, does that fulfill what we're looking at here, eventually breaking the yoke of Jacob and so on? On the one hand, we couldn't possibly say that Edom at that time was a bountiful place with the fat of the earth. It wasn't. It was dry, rocky and barren sort of place. And secondly, Edom continued on. There's a lot of judgment that is pronounced on Edom, and if the Edomites were sort of wiped out after Jerusalem was taken, which they were to some degree by the Nabateans, they should have been, if the judgment that God pronounced on them through the scriptures was then and there, then we should never hear from them again, and yet we do through Herod. And you can read back through various others like Josephus and so on and see they're very much still around on the scene. So that antipathy toward Jacob is still there, and we're looking for a time when these prophecies actually really come into fulfillment. This bountiful blessing that would be Esau's, and a time when Edom, would actually break the yoke of Jacob. Let's just read chapter 36 while we're at it. 36 verse 1. Now these are the generations of Esau, who is Edom. Esau took his wives of the daughters of Canaan, Adah, the daughter of Elon the Hittite, and Aholibamah, the daughter of Anna, the daughter of Zibeon the Hivite, and Bashemath, Ishmael's daughter. So Esau married his father's half-brother's daughter. Again, they did things differently back then. So he's married across into Ishmael. So we might expect that Esau and Edom continues to tend to align with Ishmael. As we read in the scriptures, Edom means red. When you look at the list of things up there, hopefully you can see the picture that's starting to build. Russia demonstrates many of the characteristics of Esau/Edom. Does that mean that every Russian is a descendant of Esau? No, it doesn't. In the same way that every descendant of Great Britain is not necessarily an Israelite. In fact, probably quite a small minority of people in Russia are actually descended from there. They come from all sorts of places, the Russians, one of the most multicultural places on the planet. However, Russia as a nation tends to demonstrate the characteristics of Esau and Edom. I'll go through a few. That constant antipathy toward Jacob, and in more recent times has cast off that yoke, reached a parity, at least in military power, at times through the last 100 or so years. It goes some way to explaining Russia's involvement in the Middle East at the moment as well. Does it care that much about Israel? Oh, maybe not. But what it does really care about is opposing America and Great Britain in particular in that part of the world. Esau would have a place that is big. Actually looks like a goat, doesn't it? A habitation high in the north, as other scriptures tend to indicate. It's often, and of course Russia is ginormous and way up there towards the heavens, as it were. He's associated in Jeremiah and Obadiah with the loftiness of an eagle. Now, there's plenty of nations that have an eagle as their badge, as well as Russia. But again, we're building a picture in all of these points. It's blessed with plenty. Russia in 22-23 produced almost 100 million tonnes of wheat. It exports more than 10% of the world's wheat. So it's really quite blessed, not just with wheat and other grains, oil as well. It's one of the largest exporters in the world. I'm not quite sure where that stands at the moment, seeing as Europe tried to shut it off. But there was a point there where it was second only to Saudi Arabia for the export of oil. It's quite a rich country, although the people don't tend to see a lot of the riches, I suppose. It sides with Ishmael, with the Arabs, with the Muslim world. Hamas delegation arrives in Russia. Iran, Russia, Hamas officials discuss Gaza-Israel war in Moscow. Russia offers the Arab League to collaborate in ending bloodshed in Palestinian-Israeli conflict. The colour red, of course, maybe not quite so much these days, but certainly in more recent history, very much associated with communism and Russia. Godlessness. Again, it's not so much the communist nation it once was, but it still rests on a lot of the roots of recent history through Lenin and others. Atheism is a natural and inseparable part of Marxism or communism, the theory and practice of scientific socialism. Materialism, perhaps not so much in the sense of consumerism, but rather just that focus on the natural, on the here and now, rather than the spiritual, the heavenly. Militancy, of course, it's a very powerful nation. Craftiness, the craftiness of the hunter. Building that picture, we tend to believe that there is quite a significant Edomite influence through time into Russia. Many of those involved in the Bolshevik Revolution and leading positions thereafter that set modern Russia on its course that we can trace it right back to today, probably come from that line or that line of thinking. Hopefully you can see it tends to show you a lot of those characteristics and is the best fit when looking at the struggle Esau would always have with Jacob. Ezekiel 38 and 39 seems to indicate that Russia would really lead the way in coming against Israel and the West in the end times as well. So, we've had a look at quite a lot today, and your eyes are probably falling out your head. So here's a quick summary for you. Isaac had Jacob. Isaac's stepbrother is Ishmael. Jacob's brother is Esau. Esau is the son-in-law of Ishmael. From Jacob, we get modern day Israel, USA, Great Britain, Northwestern Europe, Australia, Canada, the West, writ large. If not by descent, and certainly by culture and idea. From Ishmael, we get Arab nations, both in descent and culture and so on. Iran, other Islamic nations subscribe to Islamic heritage and so on, which can be traced through Muhammad back to Ishmael. And from Esau, we get the nation that is Russia and its characteristics and the things that it shows today. Does that look roughly like what we started off with those alignments of nations? Does that look roughly like what you read when you look up ABC News in half an hour from now, after you've finished helping us pack up, of course? That's it, isn't it? That's the world stage. And in the middle of it all is that. Israel and Jerusalem. That's the prize, that's the fight, that's the contention. Let's go to Zechariah 12 and we'll finish over here in Zechariah. Verse 1. The burden of the word of the Lord for Israel, saith the Lord, which stretcheth forth the heavens and layeth the foundation of the earth and formeth the spirit of man within him. Behold, I will make Jerusalem a cup of trembling unto all the people round about when they shall be in the siege, both against Judah and against Jerusalem. A cup of trembling. A cup throughout the Bible, particularly the prophets, Jesus refers to it as well, is something that you take on. Yeah? Sort of symbolised by, a cup like this, which I should probably drink from. I'm taking that on. I'm ingesting it. I'm imbibing it, right? In that case, it's good. But the cup, if we pass it around and everybody drinks from it, which we would never do in these post-COVID times, but if we did that, then everybody's drinking from that same cup. Well, everybody's drinking, if they want to, concern themselves with Jerusalem, from a cup of trembling, from a cup of trouble, from a cup of anxiety, from a cup of war, from a cup of violence, from a cup of anger and implacability and wicked, knotted up problem that no one can solve. That's what they're drinking from, as the Lord says. It's a cup of trembling. Verse 3, and in that day will I make Jerusalem a burdensome stone for all people. All that burden themselves with it shall be cut in pieces, though all the people of the earth be gathered together against it. You never see this sort of alignment over the Congo, over West Papua, over the various other fights all around the world that are still going on today, over cities and over borders and over countries and over waterways and over forests and over other resources. You never see this. The United States doesn't say anything about it. Russia doesn't say anything about it. Australia doesn't say anything about it. You don't get that sort of alignment. You don't get people moving their aircraft carriers into position. You don't get exchanges of rockets and others trying to pick each other off on the side and so on. Mostly it's just confined to those poor people that are left to try and battle their problems by themselves. But when it comes to Jerusalem and Israel, this is what happens. Why? Why is that? Well, hopefully we've shown why today. The Lord said it will be a burdensome stone and a cup of trembling for all who want to concern themselves with it. Burdensome stone. You ever tried swimming with some sort of weights on? Get a big stone, tie it around your waist. See if you can swim with that. It's hard going, isn't it? It's like trying to walk through really deep mud. That's how the nations feel. That's what they experience when it comes to trying to tackle the problem of Jerusalem and Israel. We'll go over to chapter 14, verse 1. Behold, the day of the Lord cometh, and thy spoil shall be divided in the midst of thee. For I will gather all nations against Jerusalem to battle. And the city shall be taken, and the houses rifled, and the women ravished. And half of the city shall go forth into captivity, and the residue of the people shall not be cut off from the city. Then shall the Lord go forth and fight against those nations, as when he fought in the day of battle. And his feet shall stand in that day upon the Mount of Olives, which is before Jerusalem on the east. And the Mount of Olives shall cleave in the midst thereof toward the east and toward the west. And there shall be a very great valley, and half of the mountain shall remove toward the north, and half of it toward the south. And ye shall flee to the valley of the mountains, for the valley of the mountains shall reach unto Azal. Yea, ye shall flee, like as you fled from before the earthquake in the days of Uzziah king of Judah. And the Lord my God shall come, and all the saints with thee. Verse 9, and the Lord shall be king over all the earth. In that day there shall be one Lord, and his name one. Where is all this headed? Where is all this headed? Well, towards Christ's return. That's where it's headed. If you get nothing else out of this, if you don't like British Israel, you don't like the line of David, you don't like Esau and Russia, that's fine. That's okay. But I tell you what, it's all heading to one place, and I think that we can all agree on, and that we should all be watching out for, and that we should all be ready for, and that is the return of Jesus Christ. How does this particular situation resolve itself? Maybe like that, maybe not. Who knows? Maybe this isn't the big one. Maybe it'll settle down again. But one day, That's going to happen, and Christ is going to descend from the heavens, from wherever he is right now, other than in our hearts, and put an end to it all, and bring righteous rule and peace, and pull the brothers apart for a bit, and say, this is how we do it. And you're going to be there with him? All the people said? Amen.